everybody. This is Karen Stern, and we are back with another edition of Beebe Book Buzz. We're really happy to have you here today, and we have with us, or I have with me, Bridget Black and Jackie Powers, who will be talking to us as well about their favorite reads, as we always do. I'm going to start today with a book called Bewilderment by Richard Powers, who you may remember as the Pulitzer Prize, the winner for the Overstory in, I think it was 2018. I talked that book here a couple of years ago, and I was a huge fan. Big book with a lot of power and scope, and talk about our connection with nature. But a lot of people kind of couldn't stomach that because of the length. It was a huge book. But if you were intrigued by it, you could try this one. It's probably about half the size, 278 pages, I think. Small but mighty, I would say. So the Bewilderment is the story of Theo and his son Robin, or Robbie as he calls him. And Theo is a kind of 40-ish astrobiologist. And if you're not sure what that is, his job is to basically spot signs of life on planets throughout our galaxy and also the galaxies beyond. And that's not science fiction. That's stuff that's really happening. And it goes to part of the plot of the book as well. But his son Robbie is just turning 9 at the start of the book. He's really smart, very smart, funny, quirky, probably what you might call, on the spectrum. But Theo has no interest in labeling his son in any way with those kinds of labels, and he certainly doesn't have any interest in giving him the medications that come along with all those labels. And he knows that his son's uncontrolled anger and sort of like wild emotional swings come mostly from the fact that he lost his mother, Alyssa, in a car crash when he was 6. So they are both dealing with her death. And Alyssa was, kind of this larger than life, amazing woman who becomes very important in the story because she was also very involved with nature, as both father and son are. She was an animal rights advocate. She was a very powerful speaker who went to legislatures and helped people pass bills and that sort of stuff. So her I guess we could call her ghost, not really a ghost, but her memory is very important in this book. She's really, in a way, another character in the book. So this is in part a book about grief and how it lives in people, both Theo and Robbie, who are these, two amazing people who are just trying to get along. Theo's trying to be a good father, and Robbie's trying to learn how to control some of his worst impulses. And they're also two people who are really immersed in and just love observing and learning about the universe. So I would say this is a book about both the macro and the micro. And that a lot of the book is set up to let you look at both ends of some kind of extreme spectrums. So at the very beginning of the book, Powers kind of had his trademark descriptions of the natural world kick in. And you see he and Robbie are on a camping trip. He's pulled Robbie out of school because there's been a bullying incident and some trouble that Robbie then got into. And so he just figures the best thing to do is to pull him out of school and take him on this camping trip into the Smokies. And so the first scene is they're like looking up at the stars through his telescope. And then as they go to sleep that night, they decide to sleep out under the stars. And so you're getting, again, all those trademark descriptions of that Powers is so amazing at, of life around you on this planet. And then every few chapters, he sticks in a chapter where he and Robbie kind of quote unquote travel to the virtual models of planets. It's a way that he helps Robbie go to sleep at night. They go and they travel to one of these virtual models of planets that he creates as part of his research. And so he does this, he talks about the planets, and he's basically showing us the incredible possibilities for the kinds of life. We tend to think of life as like just us, right? Or what we can find on this planet. But the the possibilities out there for the whole universe are just endless. So there are, planets that are just lonely all by themselves and kind of very dark and sad, and only things can grow deep underground. And then there are other planets that are water planets. And I'll just read you a tiny little bit of the kinds of things. Endless oceans that are shallow in places, kilometers deep in others. Life spread through its latitudes from steamy to frozen. Hosts of creatures turned the ocean bottoms into underwater forests. Giant blimps migrated from pole to pole, never stopping, each half of their brains taking turns to sleep. Intelligent kelp, hundreds of meters long, spelled messages in colors that rippled up the lengths of their stalks. Annelids practiced agriculture, and crustaceans built high-rise cities. Clades of fish evolved communal rituals indistinguishable from religion. So he's giving us these ideas about all these other possible ways that life can be other than the one that we know. And then he's contrasting it with the really kind of ugly and mundane nature of what's actually going on down here on Earth. And he's, they're living in a political situation that is a lot like ours, only kind of worse, just slightly worse, slightly intensified. And also similarly for the environmental situation, just slightly worse. So he kind of gives you that feeling of, the looking at it under the microscope instead of the telescope, right? You got these two views. So there are parts of there's the sort of the play between science and politics, and Theo's trying to advocate for this space telescope, a lot like the one that's about to go up next month in real life. And he's up against forces that don't want it to happen, and he has to go to Congress, and they argue about it. But so there's all of these balances throughout the book. It also balances inner space, as in like the life of the mind and the soul, against, again, this vast outer space. So Robbie has a chance, and I don't want to spoil this too much because it's kind of part of the intrigue of, or the interest of the book, is that he gets a chance to be like in a trial of some really cutting edge brain technology, brain research that will let him alter his, without any side effects, any drugs, alter the way that he is and help him to, shall we say, live in a better place in his brain than the very kind of angry and wild place that it is at the beginning of the book. So I won't go into that. It sounds a little sci-fi-ish, but again, it's not really that, doesn't feel that far off. Like the science in the book is not anything that seems very far away from where we are right now. So this is a book of balances, and it's a book that I think kind of balances better than anything that I've seen before. It really shows you, it really keeps the balance, put it that way. Like it's not coming down on one side or the other. There's both hope and sorrow. There's, there's wonder and there's horror. There's all this stuff. And he manages to kind of keep an even hand, even up to the end. And there is a lot of sorrow in this book, but the end feels hopeful in a certain sort of way. So I don't want to say too much more because that gives away the good stuff.
That sounds like a lot for 280-ish pages.
Exactly. It's a lot. It's not, I found it intriguing. It's not hard to read. It's really, really based in, like what I was talking about sounds very philosophical, I know, but it's all through the eyes of Robbie and Theo. Like it's all about, their daily interactions and how he puts Robbie to bed at night. And then this experimental treatment that he goes through that shifts things, and then a little bit of advocacy work, but basically it's their day-to-day lives and their this really lovely relationship, and his struggles to be a parent to this difficult child who he adores. And it's very much a human book, and it's written from that level, that but where you get to look up at the macro and kind of in at the micro. So I thought it was interesting. I mean, I will say I probably didn't love it as much as I love the Overstory, but I think for a lot of people this would be more accessible in certain ways than the Overstory. It's kind of, that comes down to a matter of personal
Yeah.
preference.
I did not read the Overstory myself, but I do remember the comment that Roxane Gay made about the Overstory, which is that her entire review is just, this is more information about trees than I needed.
Right. And a lot of people felt that way, whereas I mean, I found it to be exactly as much information about trees as I needed.
Yeah, I've been quite interested and haven't read it, so it's been on my list. But
yeah, it's anyway. There's another option if the Overstory was not for you. Another book that is just coming to mind when we're talking about trees is the newer one out. It's nonfiction. So again, if you're looking for something on this subject of how we're all connected in nature, and which both of these books are about, but you would rather read nonfiction, there's a new book out called The Mother Tree by Suzanne Simard. And that is the story of a woman who really discovered a lot of these connections that we have, especially through the mycelia, the fungi, whatever you want to call them, that join up everything beneath the surface of the earth. You know, there's animals, there's plants, and there's fungi, or mycelia. And her story is really amazing. It's also a story of a woman in science coming up through, she was born in the 60s, I believe, early 60s. And, you know, so she has come up through science as it has moved and decided to let women sort of play more of a part. So that's an interesting part of the story too. So there's a third option. I think that's all I have to say. Anybody else? Who wants to go next? How about Jackie?
Okay. I feel like I'm always here just for like levity. I never read anything.
We count on you.
Depth these days, like I just can't. So that's okay. So I'm going to talk The Man Who Died Twice by Richard Osman. This is the second book in the Thursday Murder Club series, and I'm pretty sure I talked about the first one here because I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
Amazon tells me it's also going to be a major motion picture soon, which I can only imagine what the cast will look like. But it's delightful. This one is no less entertaining than the first one. It's possibly even better. So if you haven't read the first one, you should. You don't need to, like you do kind of get enough. They're standalone enough, but the character building, obviously, the characters are everything. So it's worth reading the first one to get the full picture of the characters.
So wait, these are the same characters?
It's the same. Yeah, it's definitely a series. Yeah, the same people. And so the scene is kind of this idyllic, upscale retirement village in the English countryside. The characters are four septuagenarian residents who have formed the Thursday Murder Club, and so they get together on Thursdays and they look at cold cases and they try and solve cold cases. But as in the first book, now they have like a live crime, like a warm one, if you will, that sort of just falls into their laps. And because the book is really about the characters, the mystery is excellent, but it's really about the characters. And so half the book is told in this third person narrative. And then it's interspersed, just like the first one was, with the journal entries of one of the club's members, Joyce. And she's a retired nurse. She talks about tea cozies and like window treatments, and it's just her parts are bright. Seeing things through her eyes is just priceless. She comes across as this kind of dippy, like perpetually perky pensioner, but she's not to be underestimated, and just sort of steamrolls her way through things and gets her way, and like is just so well written. And then so her other three comrades are Elizabeth, who you don't get a lot about in the first book. She's sort of shrouded in mystery, but you get the impression she was some kind of spy. And now it's clear that she was in MI5 or MI6 or something. And so we've got her. And then there's Ibrahim, who is Egyptian originally, and he's a psychiatrist. And then Ron, who's kind of like a union guy. I think they describe him in the jacket as a political activist, but he's sort of, I don't know, he's like a union kind of rep, sort of loud, like watches soccer kind of guy. And the secondary characters are just amazing. And some of them are carryovers from the previous book. and others are new to this one. But there's two cops who are good friends, and there's kind of a love story between one of them and the other one's mother. Like it's delightful. But so they end up in there's someone from Elizabeth's MI6 past who comes back and asks for her help, and she ends up in the kind of in the middle of this slightly ridiculous scenario, but it's still really fun. They end up looking for missing diamonds. There's a couple of murders. They end up trying to avenge this assault on one of their own. And while it is really all about the characters, the mystery is really, they're both in this book and the last one are really clever. And actually in this one, there's more than one mystery. And there's hidden red herrings, and you suspect one person for 20 pages, and then you're like, no, it's definitely not them. It goes on. It's funny though, because it's a really warm, the tone is really warm and upbeat, and you kind of think it's going to be cozy, but it's not. Like the murders are not cozy. They're not described in a really horrific way, but they are horrific. Like they're really quite gruesome, but they're
so like very, you mean like conceptually they're gruesome, but they don't give you all the little tiny details.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
like it's they're kind of they're very violent. Like you're just like, whoa, that was and they're all just, but everything's kind of go with it. And it's not that they don't describe them, but it's not in so much detail that you're like, ooh. But they sort of can be surprising because you are expecting something kind of cozy. I mean, it's very much, if you've ever watched Midsummer Murders, it's like that, where like the murders are not cozy, but like everything around it is, so it doesn't really matter.
Right.
It's like they shade just a tiny bit ridiculous. So it's hard to they're not like upsetting. But I think the highlight of this book is that he really gives the characters a lot more depth and kind of dimension in this one. He's really, really good at bringing out their backstories and kind of giving you these insights into them while just kind of going on with the narrative. There's there's little conversations where you learn things about people, and you learn a lot more, as I said, about Elizabeth, who in the first book you like I said, you kind of get the impression she's a spy, but they don't really get into it. You don't know what her backstory is. So this one you get a lot more. You kind of get you get them reflecting on their lives in a way that you probably do when you're in your 70s. They kind of thinking about like what they regret, and maybe there's things that they could still do, and having those kind of just reflections, a lot of thoughts and insights into their lives that really rounded them out as characters. They're entertaining. They were already entertaining, and now they're a little bit more fleshed out. So I would read this again. Like I would literally just start and read it again right now. It's
wow,
excellent.
that's an endorsement. So, but who is this for? Is this for cozy readers? Is this for? And it feels also like you're saying that the series I assume it's supposed to go on.
It feels like it. I would expect it to.
Because the way you're talking about the character development sounds like almost like Penny or something, where they kind of started off more superficially, and then you get to know the characters as you get.
It's like that, but it's not. I mean, it's not.
No, I know it's not like
in that way. It's more. It's very Anthony Horowitz, the Hawthorne series. It's that. It reads like that. It's the same. These are funnier. I think the characters are better, I think, but it's the tone is the same. It's kind of like a bunch of quirky people doing something kind of ridiculous. That British thing, isn't it? It's like just that British thing. Like I don't know that I can think of a book that's pulled it off that takes place here.
And we just don't do that.
We just don't do that well.
No, we don't do it in shows. We don't do it in. It's not how our murder mystery shows, except for Murder, She Wrote. That's kind of gives me a Murder, She Wrote feeling. Maybe it's just because it's older people.
Yes, well, and it kind of is. the reason they kind of get away with so much and like are able to solve these crimes is because no one's paying attention to them. Everyone's like, oh, they're old, who cares? Like they're not, they don't know what's going on, you know? Like
The Miss Marple technique.
It's
That's
the Miss
how
Marple
Marple's
technique,
always
right.
solving mysteries.
right. So it's really fun. And I was talking to our beloved Leanne yesterday about it. And she said, I was like, find me something like that, Leanne. Because she reads so much more than I do. And she's like, oh, there aren't other, like, there's not a lot like that. I think it's a hard thing to do is to, you know, to get the mystery right and to have the characters. And it's really like all the, there are no throwaway characters in here. There's lots of secondary people that are, like I said, that were in the other book and are in this one, but then there's new ones in this book too. And he just so quickly makes them interesting in these completely weird ways,
Right.
but really memorable. There's a drug dealer in this book who's delightful, and you're like, okay. But it's special. So
Well, and it's a good endorsement to say there's nothing else like it. You know, I mean, because that's cool.
I
It
can't
would be
think of
boring
anything
if there were.
yeah, that like strikes the same balance as this, and I really am dying to see it, the movie of it, because I'm always interested to see who they get to play people when you like characters when you've kind of like gotten to know them. I usually don't like who they choose.
Do you know when that's supposed to happen?
I don't know. It just when I just looked at something quickly online, and it was like soon to be a major motion picture. So
I wonder if they're going to do like the whole series or if they're going to pull them all together. Anyway, we'll see.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So that was Richard Osman, The Man Who Died Twice. Loved it. Tell us something else, Bridget.
Tell us. Oh, you got another movie tie-in.
I do have another movie tie-in. So the book that I'm discussing, I don't have it here with me, is The Power of the Dog by Thomas Savage. There is another book called Power of the Dog by Don Winslow. This is not that book. That book is about Mexican cartels. This book
Don't read that one.
Yeah. So this book is it's set on a ranch in Montana in the 1920s. It was originally published in 1968. So it's actually quite an older book. And Savage grew up on a ranch in Montana. It is sort of loosely autobiographical in parts, but more experiences than anything else, not like specific events. Principally, it is about two brothers, Phil and George Burbank, who run this ranch, that they've taken it over from their parents. Their parents aren't dead. They've just, in a very memorable turn of phrase, it says that they left after a strong discussion with Phil, which sort of tells you a lot about all of the relationships in the Burbank family. Is that he's the older brother. He is a very strong personality, and a difficult person in many ways. His way is the way to be. He has a lot of the trappings of sort of traditional masculinity. Despite the fact that they grew up very wealthy, like the Burbanks are very wealthy, which becomes clear through the book. He is like a consummate like rancher. He knows how to do everything on the ranch, and he does it just like better than anyone else. And he has learned all of ranching, and he has all of these stories about his life on the ranch. And he's very like a centered person in himself. So Phil takes up a lot of space sort of in the book and in life. Like if you knew a Phil, he would take up a lot of space. So George, who is the younger brother, who sort of fills the spaces that Phil doesn't, is in the beginning, we meet them they're sort of on a cattle drive. They go to this town. George meets a woman named Rose. They eat in her restaurant. She owns a restaurant in this town. She's a widow. Her husband has died. Phil insults her child, Peter. She has a son named Peter. Phil is rude, as is his wont. That's what he does. And George kind of tries to apologize for this. Eventually, George and Rose marry, which causes a lot of issues in general. I don't want to say too much more about what's happening, because a lot of what's good about the book is to discover sort of who these characters are. I sort of describe this book as, I was calling it a novel of the interior West, because it is set in Montana, which is sort of the like high plains. But also it's a lot about the characters' interior lives. Like it is concerned a lot with what is happening inside people's heads, even as it is about how people lie to themselves about what they are thinking and feeling, and the ways we fool ourselves. But it is a very deep character study of all of these people. Phil, Rose, Peter, George, they all have time to shine in their character motivations and understandings and their past laid out. I think it's just really well written. It's like a masterful work of character in this. You feel so much for them. Even Phil, who, like, I would say is in a lot of ways, Phil is sort of the antagonist, but you really come to understand who and what he is and why he is the way he is and how he has become this. I really liked it. And I was saying this, I don't typically read a lot of male authors. I have only, of all of the books I've read this year, only 13 of them have been by men, which is only 17% of the entire total number of books I've read. So I really don't read a lot of male authors. So the fact that I not only read this and loved it, like I think it is on probably my top of the year, like new to me reads is kind of remarkable. Yeah, like it's notable just for me. Yeah. And so it is a movie. It's just been made into a movie by Netflix from Jane Campion, which should also tell you why it is sort of a different kind of Western, that it was made by Jane Campion, who is obviously a female director and has made a lot of movies about the interior lives of people and not so much. So that's really where she's focused, and that's really what the book is about. And I think that I've seen the movie. The movie is a little bit different from the book in times, but does fulfill that promise in a lot of ways. So I would say that. I'm going to give a little more backstory on this book and Thomas Savage, because I had never heard of him before I read it. So as I said, it was first published in 1968. He was a working novelist for decades, wrote several novels of the West, but kind of not very famous ever, sort of obscure for all the time. He died in the early 2000s. He was married to a woman, but he was also gay. So that provides a little bit of backstory too. So he was gay. He had a long-standing relationship with actually the children's author, I believe you say it, Tommy DePaulo, who wrote, if some people of my age wrote Stregonona. So the author of Stregonona and the author of this book had a long-standing relationship. So that's just a little bit of backstory. But so this book, I think probably because of some of the themes, which if you can say that, as I say, Thomas Savage is gay, you might figure out that there are some gay themes in this book. just to put that. Kind of fell into obscurity. It was reissued in the early 90s with an afterword written by Annie Proulx after the book was given to her after she published Brokeback Mountain. So someone was like, I think you would enjoy this book. And she did. And so she wrote this afterward and it was republished. So most copies that exist now are from that. And I believe even there's a new edition. They reprinted it again because of the movie. That one also contains her afterward, which provides some information on sort of Thomas Savage in the book, if you enjoy it. And I would say if you do like Annie Proulx and you have read Brokeback Mountain or perhaps seen the movie, you might enjoy this, though it is very different in a lot of ways. It is about the interior lives of men and masculinity and sort of an interrogation on what it is to be a man, and particularly in the West and in this time period where I do think the 1920s is kind of an interesting period also to explore the West, because it is, as we are approaching modernity in many ways, like these traditional skills and ways of life are fading away, but you're still like, they still don't really use mechanical things to run the ranch. They're still like, it's still a lot of hands-on cattle roping and horse riding. So these like masculine pursuits of the West still kind of exist, but they're also kind of play acting in their way. So it's just very fascinating. I don't want to say too much because the surprises are what makes it so good.
Yeah. No, it sounds like definitely one to watch, one to read. Questions, which to do first?
Yeah. So I read the book and then watched the movie. And I don't know, because I think that it worked the way that I did it, but you might enjoy, if you want to be sort of surprised in the movie,
right.
That will be one that will be more surprising for you in that, because you will be surprised in the movie. And I think that it is constructed in a way that it maintains those elements, but then you would get more depth when you read the book.
When you read the book, right, which is sometimes nice.
I heard the performances are really excellent.
They are, and I really do think a different like the performers who bring the interiority that you get from the page to those performances. Like, and partially it is, I read the book, so I know what they are thinking. So like, I know the backstories here, but I think they come through even without that. Benedict Cumberbatch is sort of you might think as a strange choice for like an avatar of masculine Americanism, but he is actually very good and is like completely like the perfect choice for.
Apparently he stayed in character the entire time that he was in that, like on screen, off screen, on camera, off camera the whole time.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's one way to do it.
Yeah. But maybe that's how he achieved such a
maybe that's how he was so good at that. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I would want to be Phil all the time. That would
who'd want to be with Phil all the time, even when you're like having lunch on set? Like that sounds sort of horrifying to me. But and then Kirsten Dunst is Rose, right? Yeah,
the woman that George marries, and Jesse Plemons plays George, and they are actually a real life couple as well.
That's right. Yeah. Cool. Well, I think those are 3 pretty different choices, and hope that you found one of those that you might enjoy. We will be back again in the new year, and we hope to see you then. But for now, this is all of us signing off for this month's Beebe Book Buzz. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.